All right. Well, I'm here with Alan and Caitlin, and to talk about good Comrade Snowden. And Alan has that first.
Yes, it may be time to reassess the legacy of Edward Snowden, who has just been granted Russian citizenship by presidential decree of Vladimir Putin, of course. Snowden's not coming back to the US anytime soon. He is charged with some rather hefty crimes, of the treason sort. So, should he get convicted of those, he would definitely spending the rest of his life in prison without any chance of parole. And he's still relatively young. I believe he's only 38. He's married. He now has two kids, two young children. And I guess he doesn't want to do that. So he petitioned the Russian government for Russian citizenship back in 2020. And at the time said that he's still an American and plans to raise his children as Americans, i.e., they're going to be free thinkers. And yet he went ahead and petitioned for Russian citizenship, um, which has been granted by Vladimir Putin, along with some other people at the same time. Of course, the timing of this is quite interesting because Putin, at more or less the same time, announced the mass mobilization of Russians to continue prosecuting the invasion of Ukraine, which, of course, has turned into an existential disaster for the Putin regime. So it's interesting timing. And it also is, making Snowden look worse and worse because he was hailed as this freedom fighter for exposing the illegality of the NSA monitoring system. And now he's basically a cheerleader for a dictator that's responsible for not just a war, a garden variety war, but in many ways a genocidal war in Ukraine. So
Yeah.
that's not looking too good.
Yeah. I was thinking you might take a different opinion, but that was my position. And, it would be poetic justice if they sent him to fight in Ukraine.
Which is what a U.S. administration official said, is that he's now eligible. However, some Russian officials said no, he is not eligible because supposedly in this call up, um, this conscription that they're doing right now, no, I shouldn't say conscription, it's a mobilization. They are supposedly going for only people with prior military experience.
Which he has.
Well, yes, that's a good point. No, the Russian administration person said it was prior Russian military experience, specified Russian military
Oh,
experience.
well.
Yeah.
Well, we don't really know what he's been doing in Russia all these years, but the other thing, I've forgotten my other thing about Snowden anyway.
But
Anyway,
going back to
oh,
2013, he did provide a very important service because the NSA is not supposed to be surveilling Americans. That is not within its brief.
I
And
read it in a
so,
defense thread this morning where a guy said, in fact, the stuff he leaked was being used only to spy on foreigners, and he just made it sound like they were really studying high on citizens. I don't know if any of that's true.
uh, well, yeah, we just don't know.
I
But
remember
it
the stuff
seems
he
like it
dumped
was
was
too
like
broad.
promotional PowerPoints, which were talking about how many capabilities these products had, which
Yeah.
might very well be just making it sound worse than it is.
Well, he also revealed that the US was intercepting Cisco routers
Yeah.
and then backdooring them, which I think came as a surprise to everyone.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there was quite a lot that he did reveal, and I'm sure he did set back American surveillance capabilities for, quite a few years in a number of different places.
yeah, probably. That's why his action. You could argue there's some good in what he did. The thing I thought is this shows the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and a lot of people have nothing but contempt for these do-gooders, self-righteous people, think they're saving the world, and he's like a instructive morality play of where that can lead.
Well, I don't think we need to dismiss the role of whistleblowers. The whistleblowers still play a very important role. at exposing government crimes and transgressions. So it's important.
Yeah, but the self-righteousness of it can easily lead you into a bad place.
Well, like the Pentagon Papers. That's a prime example of a whistleblower who did good.
Well, sure. Frances Haugen seems to have done pretty well.
Frances Haugen's another case, although of course she was working for a company, and so the implications are rather different there.
And the other thing too is that a lot of government agencies do have whistleblower rules in place, so that if you feel that the agency is doing something unethical, you can report it, but make sure that the data you're reporting is not like classified or going to lead to more problems later on, and work with the agency to reveal what needs to be revealed to the public. You don't need to do what Snowden did, which is just take everything into his own hands, and leak, sensitive documents to, potential enemies and weaken the stature of the United States. So
yeah, he made it into a suicide mission just so he could pose as like a heroic figure or something. Yeah. Although his argument, of course, is they would have just ignored me if I'd gone through official channels. But maybe that's because what he was saying wasn't worth saying.
Well, I think what he was saying was in parts definitely worth saying, but he was very naive. He went to Hong Kong, and then he seemed to assume that Hong Kong was first of all separate from China, and that he would be welcome to stay in Hong Kong and protected from extradition back to the US, which just betrayed a total lack of comprehension, really.
I mean, maybe he could right now be in Red China. I'm not sure if that would be a step up from Russia or not.
Well, I think in some ways China would be an improvement over Russia these days in particular.
Yeah.
But the reason why he ended up in Russia, after all, was because he intended to go to, I think it was Guatemala. He had an opportunity to basically get asylum in Guatemala, but had to fly through Moscow. And then the US revoked his passport en route, and then the Russian authorities wouldn't let him on the plane. I think they could have, certainly.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to. They wanted to hold on to him because he was a very valuable political bargaining chip.
Yeah.
Or now he's just a PR chip. So there he is. He's stuck there. And his wife is going to get Russian citizenship too, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope he has a fun life in Russia. I don't think anybody's going to have any. So one of the people fleeing the country said, anybody that can leave should leave. There's nothing good going to happen in Russia for decades now.
No, he's stuck there for good now.
And this Ukraine mess is just going to basically destroy Russia for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, there's a lot more speculation now about how this is the beginning of the end for Putin's regime. And of course, war is complex and contingent, and there's, it's impossible to predict what will come next, but Russia's definitely not winning on the battlefield.
Yeah, but even if they throw out Putin, they might just put in somebody worse,
Well, that of course is the concern, yes.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so Caitlin's got the cops tracking your cell phones.
Yeah, so unlike some cops unlike some legislators in San Francisco, which I'm sure Alan will get to in a bit, some legislators in Washington are pushing to reform some police cell phone tracking tools. So there's an article by the AP, the Associated Press, written by Jason Deeren and Garance Burke, and it's talking about a tool called Fog Reveal. So what Fog Reveal does is that it aggregates a whole bunch of cell phone data. Basically, all the data that's collected by the cell phone companies about like where you are, what you're doing with the data. Like, so think about, like, let's say you are a cell phone provider. What data do you have? Well, you know what cell towers the person's using, what cell phone they're using. You know what traffic is coming through. Now, you can't read things like HTTPS, but you know what servers they're connecting to. And if you're in an investigation, that could be really useful because let's say you want to know if so-and-so, Jimmy, Jimmy the pirate, was the one who sent a message at 3:52 p.m. You can check the logs, and even if you can't decrypt the traffic, you can say, oh, well, at 3:52 p.m., Jimmy the pirate connected to the server, and sent some data, so we can reasonably assume it was indeed Jimmy the pirate on Jimmy the pirate's phone while Jimmy the pirate was off on the high seas. So and this is a lot of data, and apparently the police can just vacuum it up. So there are a bunch of civil rights lawyers and Democratic senators who are pushing for legislation that would limit the use of such tracking tools. And I mean, and what's really frustrating about this is that I really like the situation where individuals are in control of their data. This creates a sort of natural a natural balance, right? Because you don't want the government being able to just take all the data they want. But at the same time, there are times when there are criminal investigations, and you say, well, you know what? In this case, yeah, it would be useful if the cops had access to my data. Like, let's say I was robbed, and I have video of my phone of the person who robbed me. I might want to share that. But that is very different than, the cops being able to come into my phone, take my data, et cetera, without me knowing. And vacuuming up the data too, because it's not just, they don't just have access to like one person at one time. They can, access all the cell phones in the area, who was in the area when this happened, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully some limitations will be put on this tool.
All right. Anyway, I was sort of charmed by this. Windows 11, the latest version, will now monitor if you try to put your password in Notepad. It'll pop up a box saying, don't put your password in Notepad. What are you, nuts? And all other products, but not Microsoft Excel, which is commonly used for this purpose. Obviously, people are better off to get a password manager. The part I'm interested in is, how does it do this behind the scenes? How is it handling your password? There may very well be security consequences if they're not careful in how they do that password comparison. I know Apple's been doing the same thing for a while. It keeps popping up warnings in iCloud. If you put something in iCloud keychain and it recognizes that password as being a common password or something.
Yeah, I once created a product that would test if you put your password in the wrong site, and it does not store your password in the application. It stores a salted hash of the password, and if it sees that what you put into a field is the same salt and hash as what you use on another site, it'll warn you like, hey, you're probably being phished right now. And it was such a simple thing, and due to bureaucracy and stuff, it never got deployed or anything like that. But it seems like such a simple defense. I'm always surprised that there aren't products that do this.
Well, I'm not surprised that there aren't, and I'm suspicious of this one because, remember, the password hashes are in fact protected on Windows and hard to get. And I wonder how this product works without leaving an image of the password hash present in memory, and perhaps the decrypted password in memory where it shouldn't be. I wonder.
Well, I mean, and anytime you log into Windows, there is a copy of the password hash in memory.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's not a thing. The thing is, can a normal application access it? And so if you are in control of the operating system, you could easily create a function, a kernel call saying, is this a known password hash? Pass it to the kernel. Kernel does the math. Replies yes or no. So you could totally do it. I don't see why this is a technical limitation.
Oh, it can be done well, but I wonder if it's been done well.
Well, yeah, I honestly have a lot of respect for Microsoft programmers.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine if it's Microsoft doing this, it's probably well made. So
well, I'm sure the security people will be giving it the once over, and we'll find out.
Yep.
All right, let's go back to Alan, who's got the SFPD spying on people.
Yeah, this is a huge story for San Francisco. The mayor, London Breed, and the board of supervisors have agreed on a 15-month trial of a program that will grant the San Francisco Police Department live access, real-time access to a network of security cameras throughout the city of San Francisco. And this is a big deal. This is a really big deal because this is different from the usual application of security camera footage, as Caitlin was just talking about, where after a crime has already been committed, then the police get a copy of some video stream and are able to then analyze that. This is a different situation wherein the police would have prior authorization to access cameras or network of cameras. And then as an event is happening, or possibly happening, the police can tap in and watch that stream live and presumably record it too. Is a very controversial move. The ACLU and the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, are very much opposed to it. And it's also a surprising move because up until recently, one of the supervisors who just voted for this proposal, Aaron Peskin, had a competing proposal that was opposed to it. And the mayor has had this proposal on the table for a while, but it looked like the supervisors just had no interest in it whatsoever. And yet now the supervisors have flipped, and 7 of them voted for it, and 4 voted against it. So this is a really big deal because it seems that the politics of San Francisco have changed very suddenly. Now, the reason why there's been so much push behind this, the impetus behind this, well, was explained by the current DA, Brooke Jenkins, who wrote a letter to Aaron Peskin, the chair of the Board of Supervisors, saying that this technology will allow the police to, quote, address the existence of open-air drug markets, also mass organized retail theft, like we saw in Union Square, yeah. Or on targeted neighborhood areas. And so the very justification of this doesn't make any sense, I have to say, because if you are trying to bust drug dealers, which is one of the stated reasons from DA Jenkins, you do not need a live camera feed to do that. In fact, I don't know how helpful that is in a court case, because usually the way the police bust a dealer is by catching the dealer with drugs on their person.
Yeah.
Like by doing a hand-to-hand buy with an undercover officer. And the camera's not going to make much of a difference there. And the thing is about drug dealing in San Francisco, everybody knows who the dealers are. It's obvious. You do not need cameras to know where the open-air, so-called open-air drug markets are. They're there, and they're not moving very much either, except when DPW comes through and does a sweep of the sidewalk. So the police do not need the cameras in order to find out who the dealers are. Even I recognize who the dealers are at this point. That's how obvious it is. And then as for these mass organized retail thefts, like at Union Square, the police actually were able to intercept some of the thieves during the commission of their crimes. So they didn't need cameras to do that either. So obviously, these are the justifications being given for the application of this camera monitoring technology, but really it appears that something else is going on. And the big question is, well, who's pushing for it and what kind of leverage do they have on the politicos in San Francisco? And it comes back to an earlier story that we've talked about on this podcast. The founder of Ripple, the crypto company, Chris Larson, has been bankrolling the purchase of thousands of cameras for the past decade in San Francisco. And it will be these camera networks that would probably be most used by this system because the operators of the cameras would have to give prior permission to the police to monitor the feeds. And so it seems that Larson, I mean, this is all speculation, of course, but it seems that Larson certainly approves of this. He came out, he made a public statement saying that he's all for this new policy, but he's also created the infrastructure by which to make this monitoring possible.
Well, no, I think one thing where it would help is with the car break-ins, which is I think what Larson's interested in.
Yeah, the thing is, there are a number of anecdotes, granted, but stories out there about how people have had their house broken into, their apartment broken into, their car broken into, and they've got footage on their security cameras. And they go to the police and say, somebody broke in. Here's footage of the people doing it. You can see their faces clearly. I even recognize them from the neighborhood. I've seen them hanging around my block before. And the police take a look at it and say, okay, and then nothing ever happens.
Yes.
And then maybe they even get broken into a second time.
Yeah.
Same process happens all over again.
Well, that's why we had the DA recall, and I knew something would come like San Francisco's version of stop and frisk, but I tend to agree with you. The thing that struck me is who's going to watch these cameras. There already is a huge shortage of police officers. So I think what's going on here is the mayor and the new GA have to be perceived to be doing something. So they just did something kind of at random.
Yeah, exactly. It's the do something approach to crime.
Yeah.
And this is a good point, because in fact, the police clearance rate, kind of the quote unquote solve rate for property crimes is between 1% and 2%.
Yeah.
So if something gets stolen from your place, nothing's going to happen. The police are not going to even investigate it, even if you've got that security footage.
Oh, and there's the markets at the BART station, 16th Street, where people are just selling stuff they stole from the nearby stores, just constantly.
Right. And another thing is about this narrative about the former DA, Chesa Boudin, not prosecuting. He actually had a higher charge rate than the DA who came before him, whose name I forget. So Boudin was charging more people. And however, in 2021, the police had a lower clearance rate than previously. And in fact, it dropped a lot. In fact, San Francisco has one of the worst clearance rates of any major city police departments in the nation. And at the time, there was speculation, well, maybe the police department is slow rolling its investigations because it wants Boudin to look bad. They were essentially hijacking the legal process for political ends. I don't know about the statistics for 2022, but there are clearly some real issues with the SFPD, and there have been issues with SFPD for many, many years.
Yeah.
I don't think that these cameras are going to significantly help with the stated goals of clearing the so-called open-air drug markets or with mass theft events. I don't think that's going to make any difference whatsoever. Instead, and another stated reason for this surveillance network is protests. And we have to remember that there's still significant fallout from the 2020 protests, Black Lives Matters and social justice protests, and that the SFPD has been using cameras to surveil protests, legal protests, public protests.
Yeah, well, it seems like that's the only thing they could be looking at on them, and not clear that's going to do anybody any good.
Well, it's certainly not going to do anybody good from a civil liberties standpoint.
Yeah. Well, all right. And Caitlin has the dart. This was good fun.
Yeah, and you even have the green screen background of the asteroid.
Well, I did. The last picture.
Well, there was a partial picture sent right at the end where it's like part of the image and then it blanked out. But yeah, no. NASA's DART mission hit an asteroid and it made a big explosion, several tons of TNT, the equivalent of several tons of TNT. And it's going to sort of blow it off course, assuming it worked. And so a lot of scientists are going to be studying the trajectory of this asteroid to make sure it's going in the direction it wants. So the idea is that Earth sometimes gets hit by very large asteroids, and it could potentially cause a lot of damage, and a lot of human lives. Now, they're very rare, but just like supervolcanoes, we definitely do not want to have to deal with one during human civilization. And it's preventable. We can track the trajectories of asteroids, and if one's going to hit Earth, if we hit it soon enough, even just very gently, we can knock it off course. Because of the giant distances involved. So if you just change the angle just very slightly, over the course of many, many AUs, it turns into, you redirect it a lot, essentially. They hit the DART mission, the planetary impactor, or the asteroid impactor, hit perfectly in the center of the asteroid, and their actual telescopes were on the ground, were trained on the asteroid as well. You can see the little puff of smoke behind it as it got hit. I mean, it was a strike. And what people I don't think realize is that even though the asteroid itself is the size of like several football fields, if we were looking at Sam's image, Sam's whole body would like sort of fit on like one of those big rocks. Like it's a big target it hits. But when you're talking about the size of space, you're essentially, hitting two needles together, the heads of two needles together over, shooting them across a football field. It's ridiculous the amount of precision that's involved in getting this to hit. But they hit it, and it worked. Yeah, I was really excited to see it happen. Sam, you're muted.
I thought it was very clever. They found a tiny asteroid that was orbiting a bigger asteroid, so it has a very fragile gravitational connection. So a deflection of the orbit will be easier to spot. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but we'll know in the coming days whether they actually deflected the orbit by the expected amount.
Right. Oh, and the asteroid it hit is Dimorphos.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep, right. And it's it's 160 meters in diameter. Mm-hmm. Good. So you're right. It orbits a larger one that's 780 meters. So it was like two needles.
Yeah, a very good system to detect a small perturbation.
Yep.
All right. Well, some MIT engineers wanted to make better batteries. This is a huge issue. We need all these lithium batteries for Teslas and everything, and there's not enough lithium, and it's very toxic to mine and all that jazz. So he just tried to find cheaper materials and found that you can make a battery out of aluminum and sulfur. But you have to have a molten salt in the middle that is heated up to about the boiling point of water. And they say this thing is cheap to manufacture. Of course, none of these difficult to obtain elements. And he says you don't even need to artificially heat it. The process of charging and discharging the battery will create enough heat to keep the salt hot enough. And so they made a company and they're trying to perfect these and use them for example, vehicle charging stations and other places, solar collectors, where you just want to store a lot of power with a big fixed battery, and it's okay that it's kind of hot. So we'll see. This may be a solution, because we're going to need an enormous amount of batteries as we try to electrify everything. And the current battery technologies all require exotic metals that get us in trouble. So we'll see if that turns out to be good. One issue is it might not have enough charging cycles, but hopefully they can work on that. Anyway, and then Alan has got Minecraft.
Yeah, it's a breakthrough in computing technology. Somebody has made Minecraft inside of Minecraft. We talked about a long time ago on this podcast about how somebody on the internet with the handle Sam Uri had built a CPU, a functional CPU inside of Minecraft. And it was a huge structure, kind of looked like a Borg cube, and it was extremely slow, like 0.5 hertz, but it could do some computation. Well, this Sam Uri teamed up with a couple of other, let's call them computer eccentrics, going by the handles of Uwerta and Stack Double Flow. And they took that original CPU called the Chungus, if I'm not mistaken, and they've created Chungus 2, which is now a fully functional PC inside of Minecraft. And you can actually play Minecraft inside of your Minecraft using this Chungus 2. And this Chungus 2, it has its own CPU, it has its own GPU, I guess you could call it, and even its own screen, its own monitor, I guess you could call it. It's extremely slow, but you can do things. I've never played Minecraft, so I don't know how it works, but you can craft stuff and you can dye and you can smelt stuff or whatever they call it. So it's all there. Well, no, not all of it, not the whole game really, but some of the functionality is there, and you can watch it. You can see, if you squint and use your imagination, you can actually see stuff happening on this little tiny display that's connected to this computer. So it's a really important feat of computing, because this whole CPU that they've constructed, this Chungus 2, has a speed of 0.5 hertz. And what they did was they didn't speed up the CPU, but they sped up the server in which the game was in which the whole thing was being hosted by a factor of, I don't know, 20,000 or something like that. And so it is kind of playable as a result, kind of, with, again, a lot of imagination and patience. So a very impressive feat, because the Samuri person has been working on it for the past decade, and they have now finally achieved this this major accomplishment. Well, as I was saying, in computing history.
Yeah, just sort of a stunt, like spinning plates on a stick.
Yeah, well, it is kind of a stunt, unfortunately, and I can't imagine spending a decade working on it. But at least there are a few tricks. You can not play Doom yet. That's not possible, but you can play other games like Tetris and Snake. So it's a multi-programming computer.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of Dan Kaminsky's talks where he took DNS and tunneled it over TLS and tunneled it over some other protocol, another protocol, and finally ended with DNS. So it was DNS over DNS. Anyway. Anyway, all right. And Caitlin has got the Artemis 1. Something seems to be wrong with that thing, huh?
Well, no. Actually, they are taking their time, and thankfully they are. So, unfortunately, there were some fuel issues at the first two launches. So people are waiting in bated breath for the next launch attempt to see if it'll actually launch, because this is basically, the SLS is basically the new Saturn V. In fact, it is slightly more powerful. And everyone wants to see it go. It's going to take us back to the moon. It's awesome. It's also a new rocket. So, of course, with all new rockets, there's going to be, you have to train the crews. You have to figure out the quirks, what you have to look out for when you're fueling it. Does it have, does the foam come off in certain ways? How does, it's a new rocket, okay? So the teams just have to know the rocket inside and out. And that's what's going on. And that's why it's been sort of scrubbed. The missions have been previously scrubbed. There's nothing wrong with the rocket. It's just a new rocket. So, and they just want to make sure that any launch with this rocket is going to be perfect, because it's much cheaper to scrub than it is to clean up rocket debris all over the place. So, unfortunately, though, Hurricane Ian is approaching Florida, and that means that all future launches of the rocket have essentially been scrubbed until mid-November. So that's when we're going to see the next attempt, hopefully, of launching the SLS.
Yeah.
But eventually it will get up, it will launch, and it will be taking payloads to the moon.
It's going to launch that very elliptical moon orbit thing, right?
I don't know. Maybe.
I think it is, yeah. They're going to launch a very eccentric satellite for the moment.
Yep.
Anyway, so the Europeans are launching a pilot program to do quantum key distribution over a laser from orbit. And quantum key distribution is where you send a beam of light so weak that you have one bit encoded in one photon. And the point is you can only measure it once. If an attacker intercepts that and measures it, you know that it happened. So you can deliver a secret key through a channel that is protected by quantum mechanics. And this has been working terrestrially over fiber optics for a while, but now they're going to try to do it from space. And if they get it working, it would be a secure channel of communication to satellites. So it's will be interesting to see what comes of that. And I think that's it for this one. We'll be back on Friday.
So,
there was something else?
yeah, I was going to say, so can the single photons be detected through Earth's atmosphere to the satellites?
In principle, yeah. I mean, it has a chance of being absorbed and interacting with the atmosphere, which would destroy it. But it's not that you get them all. It's just that if you do get it, you know that nobody else got it.
Right. Because I was thinking, clouds are sometimes the thing you have to deal with.
Yes, and that
smog.
would mean that you'd have a higher chance of loss, but loss is okay.
Yeah, plus you have the background radiation of Earth as well. So
yes,
there's a whole bunch of other photons being released at once. And if you're looking for one specific photon, that I imagine is quite a challenge.
Well, yes, it is. Now that you mention it, that's what they're going to do. But it'll be interesting to see if it works. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.